Welcome to Lecture 13, Foreign Policy of South Africa. For this lecture, we shall look at the formation and conduct of foreign policy in South Africa. At the end of the lecture, you should be able to describe the importance of South Africa on the African continent. Explain South Africa's foreign policy. Content: South Africa on the continent's southern tip is bordered by the Atlantic Ocean on the west and by the Indian Ocean on the south and east. Its neighbors are Namibia in the northwest, and Zimbabwe and Botswana in the north, and Mozambique and Swaziland in the northeast. The Kingdom of Lesotho forms an enclave within the southeast part of South Africa. South Africa's foreign policy. The development of South Africa's foreign policy can be divided into two phases. The first phase spans the years of National Party rule, 1948 to 1994, and the second, the phase of the African National Congress (ANC) led government since April 1994. This phase includes the transition period of 1990 and 1994 as it formed the foundation of post-1994 foreign policy. The foreign policy that was implemented before April 1994 by the National Party government will not be dealt with in its entirety, but the emphasis will be on the more salient features of National Party foreign policy. Since South Africa's transition to democracy in 1994 and its official re-entry onto the global stage, the country, Africa, has demonstrated a strong commitment to promoting the interests of Africa and in being the voice of the continent internationally. Thus, there have been several enduring principles which have guided its conduct in international affairs and which have persisted through the three presidential eras. This include a commitment to promoting human rights, democracy, justice, and international law in interstate relations, putting Africa at the center of its foreign policy, contributing to international peace and the peaceful resolution of conflict, and pursuing economic development through regional and international cooperation. In advancing these principles, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, DIRCO, adopted a medium-term strategic plan, MTSP, for 2009 and 2012, which has six major priority areas and which reflect the country's strategic concerns and emphasis in its foreign policy and international relations. These priorities are: continuing emphasis of the African continent. The aim is to promote socio-economic development and improve stability in Africa, with NEPAD providing the broad template consolidating regional and bilateral relations form an integral part of this strategic thrust, and this includes, inter alia, contributing to efforts to restore macroeconomic and fiscal stability, promoting regulatory frameworks that help to improve trade, investment and financial services, building capacity in education, training and health, supporting the development of infrastructure to facilitate intra-African trade and investment, cooperation in scientific and technological research in the beneficiation of mineral resources and improving capacity in the energy sector, improving the political and economic integration of SADC. Since joining SADC in 1994, South Africa has made a concerted effort to contribute to the region's security, growth and development. It views its future as intrinsically linked to the plight of its neighbors. It has done so on the basis of four pillars: contributing to the political unity and cohesion of SADC as a development community, deepening regional integration, intensifying its role in the building and development of regional infrastructure, and assisting with improving the region's security and resolving conflict. Strengthening South-South relations. The focus here is to use bilateral and multilateral mechanisms to create political, economic and social convergence and synergy in the fight against poverty, underdevelopment and marginalization of poor and developing countries, the South in international affairs. Strategic imperatives include active engagements with the non-aligned movement and the G77 plus China, implementation of IBSA agreements and actions, and action plans, active involvement in formations such as the New African-Asia Strategic Partnership, NAASP, and the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, as viable vehicles for South-South socio-economic cooperation. South Africa's intention to seek membership in the BRIC axis provides another platform for engagement. In addition, it has also sought to build and participate in South-led tactical alliances such as the WTO's G20 and NAMA 11 to address regional and global inequality in trade and development. Strengthening relations with formations of the North. The focus here is on developing strategic partnerships with developed countries that engage them on two fronts: helping to meet South Africa's own national priorities in education, health, rural development, employment, and fighting crime, and advancing the development and economic growth needs of Africa and other developing countries. Critical in this regard are relations with the G8 and the OECD countries and the US and EU. Strengthening economic and political relations. This focus is primarily informed by how South Africa's national interest can be promoted and expanded through bilateral relationships that advance the country's economic growth and development, but it also includes a people-to-people dimension, aligning and coordinating South Africa's international engagement among and between all spheres of government and between the public and private sectors, marketing South Africa and Africa abroad, and improving communications about South Africa's foreign policy positions at home and abroad. A critical thrust here is relations with strategic countries such as China, India, Brazil, Nigeria, Germany, Russia, the US, and so on. South Africa thus invests great diplomatic energy and resources in managing a complex network of standing binational commissions in promoting this priority. Participating in the system of global governance. In this context, the attainment of a stable, secure, and equitable global order is an important objective based on principles of multilateralism and international cooperation. The aim is to enhance the development objectives of Africa and developing countries through promoting reform of international organizations such as the UN Security Council, the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO. South Africa also promotes developing country positions with regard to the Doha Round in the WTO, attaining the MDG targets, fostering global partnerships to deal with the challenge of climate change, and advancing frameworks for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. As the only African country in the G20, which is now the new de facto steering mechanism for global economic governance, it has a unique opportunity to advance values, norms, and positions that promote the interests of Africa and other developing countries. These priorities must very much be viewed through the prism of the government's ongoing attempt to play a role in international affairs by crafting a foreign policy agenda that responds to the country's constitutional values and funding provisions to create a better life for its own citizens as a quintessential touchstone of its national interest. This is inextricably interwoven with the essential element of a normative charter that recognizes South Africa's manifest destiny in Africa, which in many ways is an integral part of its multilateral agenda of advancing human welfare and prosperity and promoting sustainable development and global peace and security. Since South Africa's democratic transition in 1994, a key aspect of South Africa's foreign policy has been to assume the role of peacemaker and negotiator in Africa, a champion of Africa's interests abroad. South Africa in Africa. The country's mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, and Burundi attest to this. South Africa pursues development, peace and security, democratic governance and economic growth. Its companies have invested heavily across the continent, especially in mining, financial services, construction, manufacturing, telecommunications, and leisure industries. Those with prominent African footprints now include AngloGold, Naspers, Barlow World, Sasol, South African Breweries, Sappi, the MTN Group, Nampak, and the Protea Hotel Group. South African banking and financial sectors have been able to gain significant access to markets in the continent in the aftermath of apartheid. Stanbic Africa, in addition to its presence in all SADC countries except Angola, has operations in Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana. Standard Bank is probably the largest with branches in over 30 countries, buoyed significantly by the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China's 20% or 39.2 billion rand equity stake. With the top 5 banks on the continent, South Africa's dominance of Africa financial services seems assured and is only limited by continued caution on the part of management. Furthermore, thanks to South Africa's export-led growth strategy, its trade with Africa has risen by more than 300% since 1994. There remains, however, a vast trade discrepancy between South Africa, which accounts for 40% of sub-Saharan Africa's GDP, and its continental trade partners. South Africa's trade with the rest of the continent remains heavily skewed in its favor. Exports to Africa, mostly manufactured goods, increased from 9.1 billion rand in 1994 to 44 billion rand in 2003, while imports from Africa increased from a low base of 320 million rand to 8.4 billion rand during the same period. South Africa's engagement with Africa rests on 3 pillars: strengthening Africa's regional, South African Customs Union (SACU) and Southern African Development Community (SADC) and Continental African Union (AU) institutions by enhancing South Africa's proactive participation in these bodies aimed at promoting integration and development, supporting the implementation of Africa's Socio-Economic Development Programme, the New Partnership for Africa's Development (NEPAD), and of the SADC's Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan (RISDP), the regional expression of NEPAD. Strengthening bilateral relations through effective structures for dialogue and cooperation. This includes support for peace, security, stability, and post-conflict reconstruction initiatives, and South Africa's participation in the implementation of Africa's peace and security agenda and the management of peace missions. In SADC, South Africa has played a major role in reforming the region's trade and economic regimes, especially as a catalyst of the Trade and Investment Protocols 2000. With investment exceeding 45 billion rand, South Africa was by far the largest investor in the region, and a good example of South Africa's deepening economic engagement in the region is its relationship with Mozambique. South Africa and SADC. Over the last decade, Mozambique has emerged as a leading destination for South Africa and SADC. Over the last decade, Mozambique has emerged as the leading destination for South African investment, accounting for 49% of total FDI from 1997 to 2002. Over 250 South African companies have been involved in more than 320 projects and joint ventures, registering an accumulated investment of 10.1 billion rand by the end of 2003. The largest investment of over 7 billion rand is by Sasol in the Pande and Temen gas fields. South African investment in Mozambique, mostly endorsed by the government, have centered on iron, steel, and aluminium plants, as well as infrastructure development linked to spatial development initiatives, including transport corridors. In contrast, and while Zimbabwe remains a critical regional actor, its deepening economic crisis has had a severe impact on the South African economy on 3 fronts: the decline of exports to Zimbabwe, the damage caused by loss of investor confidence in South Africa, and the humanitarian and employment problems caused by a huge population of economic migrants. South Africa has been Zimbabwe's biggest trading partner, supplying 40% of its imports and receiving 25% of its exports. The decline in the value of South Africa's exports is estimated at 22 billion rand, and this is symptomatic of the dramatic shrinkage of the Zimbabwean economy, which is now 40% smaller than it was in 1999. Other important regional strategic partnerships which South Africa has developed are with the Angola, the DRC, and Zambia, where relations have been institutionalized through standing bi-national commissions. The president is ultimately responsible for the international relations of the country. It is a prerogative of the president to appoint ambassadors and receive foreign ambassadors. In the execution of his other international functions, he is assisted by the deputy president, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, in accordance with his cabinet portfolio responsibilities, he is charged with the formulation and execution of South Africa's foreign policy and with the daily conduct of South Africa's international relations. He assumes overall responsibility for all aspects of South Africa's international relations in consultation with the President. In practice, he consults the cabinet and individual cabinet colleagues on aspects of major importance, as well as aspects which overlap or link up with the activities of other government departments and ministers. In view of his overall responsibility, the minister advises the President and the Deputy President on those international matters in which they should be involved, and other cabinet ministers are required to consult the Minister of Foreign Affairs on their international role where applicable. From this practice at cabinet level, which is a presidential instruction, it also follows that there must be similar interaction between departments. South Africa has established diplomatic relations with 165 of the more than 180 members of the United Nations. It is beyond South Africa's means and also impractical to open embassies or consular missions in all countries. South Africa maintains missions at embassy level in 74 countries and another 21 additional consular and other missions in important cities, particularly in regard to trade promotion. Permanent missions to the United Nations and other international organizations have been established in New York and Geneva, while embassies in Vienna, Addis Ababa, and Nairobi also function as multilateral missions to international organizations. Missions in Paris, Rome, Washington, The Hague, and Montreal have additional multilateral monitoring functions. Brussels is the site of South Africa's permanent mission to the European Union and other European institutions. On May 15, 2004, South Africa was awarded with the winning bid to host the 2010 FIFA World Cup, becoming the first African nation to serve as a host for the international football soccer competition. 9 cities hosted matches for the event: Johannesburg with 2 stadiums, Cape Town, Pretoria, Durban, Port Elizabeth, Bloemfontein, Rustenburg, Nelspruit, and Polokwane. With a large number of tourists expected to arrive and travel throughout the country for the event, attention focused on improving transportation. Americans purchased the largest number of tickets from overseas. South Africa's transportation infrastructure is well developed, supporting both domestic and regional needs. Billions were spent to upgrade international airports and national roads for the 2010 FIFA World Cup. The 2010 World Cup was the largest event ever to be held on the African continent. In preparation, South Africa spent over $5 billion on building and improving stadiums and transportation systems and ensuring that security measures were up to par for the event. By the end of the competition on July 11, over 3.8 million fans had attended the 64 matches, the third highest turnout in FIFA's history, falling short of the records held by Germany and the US. The World Cup was expected to add an additional 0.5% to South Africa's 2010 GDP growth, fully an additional $5 billion, 35 billion rand to GDP. Summary: there are 6 major priority areas of South Africa foreign policy. 1. Continuing emphasis on the African continent. 2. Improving the political and economic integration of SADC. 3. Strengthening South-South relations. 4. Strengthening relations with formations of the North. 5. Strengthening economic and political relations. 6. Participating in the system of global governance. Since 1994, a key aspect of South Africa's foreign policy has been to assume the role of peacemaker and negotiator in Africa and a champion of Africa's interests abroad. The country pursues development, peace and security, and democratic governance and economic growth. End of Lecture 13. Thanks for listening.